Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Appreciate you all coming down tonight. And for those of you who are watching this on television, we welcome you as well. I want to welcome our city council members. We have, I think it's 4 of us tonight, 4 or 5. Jordan should be here in a little bit. But welcome. We have resources here from OC Animal Care and also from Fish and Wildlife from the state, here to talk to you about coyotes in our neighborhood. So I look forward to that. I know we all have different experiences with coyotes and living in our neighborhood. I know I do. Matter of fact, I had one on my camera for 3 nights in a row this week, so on the front of my house, foraging through the front of the house in the yard. But at any rate, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and these 2 ladies and let them spend some time with you and talk to you a little bit about what's going on in our neighborhood. Okay? Thank you.
Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. I'll introduce myself. I'm Lieutenant Kevin Frager. I work for OC Animal Care. I am a field supervisor. I help supervise our field officers. This July, I'll be working for OC Animal Care for 11 years. I've been a field supervisor for about 4 of those years. And tonight, I'd like to talk to you guys about coyotes in your community. Hopefully give you a little information on coyotes, maybe give you guys some tips on how to deter them from your neighborhood. And then at the very end, after I speak and Fish and Wildlife speaks, we'll be open for any and all questions. Before I begin, the question I always ask everyone at every meeting I go to is, and I expect everyone's hand to be raised, how many of you have seen coyotes in your neighborhood? Yeah, like everybody. Yeah. The next question I always ask, and this is a tough question because I feel for anyone that's gone through this, who's ever lost a pet from a coyote? Yeah, a few people. 3, yeah. I feel horrible. That's a horrible thing any pet owner has to go through, so I really feel for you guys. If we can keep all questions until the end, I'll be here as long as you guys want me to, and I'll answer all the questions you may have. So let's start. This is kind of the agenda for tonight. First, we'll go over some basic identification and behavior of coyotes. The question everyone asks is, why are these coyotes in my neighborhood? What can you guys do, or what can your community do to help deter them from your neighborhood? What do we, OC Animal Care, recommend? When should you call us? And then at the very end, I'll take all questions. So some basic identification and behavior. A normal, healthy coyote is approximately the size, they can be larger or bigger, than a typical Cocker Spaniel. On average, they can be bigger, they can be smaller. Adults weigh anywhere between 15 and 50 pounds. Depending on their diet, but the average weight is about 25 pounds. Their pups are born in the spring and they're raised through the summer. So those are the months you're gonna see more coyote activity. Right now we're getting into summer, so you will be seeing more coyote activity. I'll be going over that in a little bit. So the biggest myth out there for coyotes is that they're nocturnal. That's not true. That's a myth. The reason you see more coyote activity at night, does anyone have any guesses? In the urban area? Any? Yeah. You got close. It is quieter. There's less people. Do you know what the only predator for an urban coyote is? Yep, bingo, cars. That's the biggest predator for coyotes in the urban environment. So typically coyotes will be more active at night just because they've learned to adapt and hunt at night because there's less people, there's less cars, it's easier for them to get food. However, because we're in the spring, summer months, you're gonna see more activity typically in these months during the day. The mom coyotes are out getting food for the pups. They're teaching the pups how to hunt. So you're going to see much more activity during the morning during these months. A normal, healthy coyote is fearful of people. However, they are very curious animals, and they're very smart. So typically, you'll see a coyote acting this way, kind of just observing someone. I think they're walking their dog. That doesn't always mean that they're looking at that dog for food. They're just curious most of the time, trying to see what you're doing. It's kind of their form of entertainment. Coyotes are shy but curious. Sometimes, like this picture shows, they'll observe people from a distance just to see kind of what they're doing. Coyotes live in a pack, and they're led by a dominant pair, an alpha male and an alpha female. And they are considered monogamous, and they mate for life. Both the mom and the dad help raise the pups. So the burning question is, why are these coyotes in my neighborhood? The biggest reason is the food source. Rodents are their number one diet in the urban environment. If we didn't have coyotes in our neighborhood tonight, I would be talking to you guys about the enormous amount of rats in your neighborhood. And rats, they carry some really nasty diseases. They do carry bubonic plague. So without coyotes, that would be an issue that we may experience. They can sometimes go after deer, but that's not typically normal. They will always go after a food source that requires the least amount of energy, such as fallen fruit. A lot of people don't think of coyotes eating fruit, but they are omnivore. They eat fruit. They basically will eat anything. But the biggest one, and I highlighted it in red, is what people don't think about typically, is the human-associated food, the trash. Anytime our agency goes out to an area where they have an increased amount of coyote activity, and they're trying to figure out why these coyotes are in my neighborhood, usually apartment complexes, I'll go out first and kind of survey the area. The number one thing I always see is the amount of trash in these areas. They have dumpsters overflowing. They don't have guardrails over the dumpsters, so it's very easy for a coyote to just jump in there and start digging for food. That's the number one reason why we always see an increase of coyote activity in a specific area. Their habitat, they will, because there's a lack of predators in the urban environment, they kind of have free reign of where they'll make their habitat. Typically, they'll have their habitat where there's a really close access to water, a drinking source, or there's close access to food, like trash cans, stuff like that. And they're pretty well hidden. The picture on the right kind of shows a zoomed out view of a coyote den. You wouldn't even think it's there. And then the photo on the left is kind of the zoomed in view where the coyote made their den. So what can we do as members in our community to kind of limit the amount of coyotes we see? The number one thing we can all do is limit the food source. Because rodents are their number one diet in the urban environment, the best thing we can do is remove food sources for the rodents. Trash, like I was talking about earlier, making sure the lids are secure, making sure if you see that photo, it's bungee corded to the wall so they can't, or the fence so they can't knock it over. Another food source people don't think about are bird feeders. Because I don't know if you've seen a bird eat from a bird feeder, they're very messy and they kind of get seed everywhere. Well, that's going to attract rodents, and rodents will attract coyotes. So just keep in mind, if you guys have bird feeders, kind of move them away from like large shrubbery areas. Pick up any fallen seed. Just make sure it's clean, because that will attract rodents. Will attract coyotes. Another food source. A lot of people like to feed their pets outdoors. The number one thing we can do as a community is, after your pets are done eating outside, pick up the food that they didn't eat, because any food you leave out for your pets, a coyote can come by and think it's food for them. Make sure you're keeping your pets under observation, especially during the early morning and evening, night hours. Use a leash if possible. And then, again, if you guys have any fruit trees, they will eat fruit. If there's any fallen fruit on the ground, make sure we're picking that up, because they will go after the fruit. We can help by limiting their habitat. If you see the photo on the left, that coyote's it's a wood pile. And then on the photo on the right, it's like a shed with a lifted up space. These areas are really prone for coyotes to kind of think of them as their home. They like really tight places where they feel secure. So we can block off that entrance to the underneath of the shed. Any like logs or anything kind of like messy in your backyard where they can make a home. Just make sure we're being clean. Water is another thing we can limit for coyotes. I know everyone likes to have fountains, they're pretty and everything, but just remember, coyotes, think of them as big water bowls. They will drink from water fountains. It will attract prey that the coyotes eat. Rabbits will come drink from these, so just be mindful of that. Another den site are these like sewage drains, the storm drains. We recommend that if mesh can be put up to limit these, they will make dens out of these. That's typically, we see a lot of these types of dens in Huntington Beach. They have a lot of these drainage pipes. Fencing is also key. Coyotes are really good at jumping. I've actually seen a coyote with a broken leg from sitting down jump a 10-foot wall without running. They're very good at jumping. They're also really good at digging. So we recommend either increasing the fence height and the depth. They can dig pretty quick, and they'll squeeze under fences. There's also things called a coyote roller. Each city is different. I don't know if Villa Park lets you install these on your fence, so you'd have to check with the city on this. I don't want to get you guys in trouble. But it kind of looks like a big rolling pin that people put on their fence. It looks like this. And when a coyote tries to jump over the fence, it'll cause it to roll, and they're not able to get over as easily. Now, the fence has to be kind of high. You can't put this on like a 3-foot fence. They'll just clear it. So the fence height is key on these. This is one someone made just using PVC, and it's like an aluminum pipe. So they're pretty easy to make on your own. This is actually someone made a pet enclosure at their house. Their pets can go in and out of their house into their backyard they can just let their pets out and they don't even have to worry about coyotes. The person that sent me this photo, they've actually been outside and they've seen a coyote on top of that enclosure. That's kind of like a lot to undertake, but it's just an option. I know it's not everyone can do that. It's not reasonable for everyone, but it's just an option. Some more photos. I don't know if you can see, but there's like a little doggy door they can come in and out of. Photo on the left and the right. There's also motion sensing deterrents that seem to be effective. When I survey these meetings I go to, typically the ones that work the best that I hear from most people are the motion activated sprinklers. It's the noise it makes. It's not necessarily the water, but the noise, it kind of freaks them out. Those typically seem to work the best from what I've been told. Hazing is another method we like to stress on the community that we can all do to help limit the coyote behavior or coyote activity in our neighborhood. most of the time when we ask people, have you tried hazing a coyote? Have you tried scaring a coyote out of your neighborhood? They will say they've tried, but it doesn't work. And then when we further ask them, like, how did you try to scare the coyote? How did you try to haze the coyote out of your neighborhood? We typically find that they attempted, but they didn't follow through with the hazing. The biggest thing you can do is make eye contact with the coyote. And when you scare a coyote, you want to be so loud that your neighbors come out of their house wondering what is going on. When I ask someone, how did you haze the coyote? They say, we yelled at it. And then when I ask them, how did you yell at it? They go, ah. You want to be louder. You want to be, ah! That's how loud you want to be. You want to scare people. You want them to come out of their house wondering what is going on. And the biggest thing is follow through. Because I think I was talking to this gentleman here. When you haze a coyote, typically what they will do is they will, I'm talking about a normal, healthy coyote. They will kind of run or walk away. But what they'll do is like this coyote does. They'll stop. Typically they'll sit and they'll look at you. Like, what are you going to do now? You're not done hazing that coyote. You want to keep yelling at it. When when you've successfully hazed a coyote when you don't see it anymore. If you still see the coyote, you're not done hazing it. Coin cans, you can shake at it. The biggest one that works, that I know personally works the best, is a lot of people, they ask me if, they should carry pepper spray. Has anyone here ever been hit with pepper spray? It's not fun. It's not an experience you will ever forget. It literally feels like glass is being shoved in your eye. It's not fun. The problem with using pepper spray is if you spray it and there's a gust of wind, you have a really good chance of blowback, and now you're incapacitated. The best option I tell people to use that I've seen works the best are air horns, and you want to just lay down that button until you don't see the coyote anymore. I've gone to calls, and my radio, typically I'll turn it up at full volume, and I can make a tone, and that'll scare it away most of the time. If it's not being scared by that, it usually means the coyote's been habituated, which means it's kind of lost fear of people. And that can happen a variety of ways. It can happen, there are people out there, believe it or not, that feel sorry for these coyotes, and they will leave food out for it. We've actually caught people that have left steak out for coyotes, water bowls for coyotes. That's typically the reason why these coyotes lose fear of humans, because they think of us as like, oh, they're going to give me a meal. So what does OC Animal Care recommend? The biggest thing we recommend is that I'm glad all you guys came here to this meeting, but it requires community engagement, and it requires community participation. If you're hazing a coyote, but none of your other neighbors are, the coyotes are just going to go next door for food. It has to take the whole community, the whole neighborhood, to be on board, to the entire neighborhood to help with the trash situation, pick up fallen fruit, have pet awareness. So it's going to take the community to help limit the coyotes in your neighborhood. There is a website. I know it's kind of hard to see. It's highlighted. I can give it to you after the presentation. But if you go to that website, it's put on by the University of California. You can put in a sighting for a coyote. You can put in if your pet was attacked, if a person was bit, and all that's tracked, and you can see all the little dots where coyotes have been. So when should you call OC Animal Care? Anytime a coyote has been habituated, which means that, like I said, they've lost their fear of humans, and the hazing techniques that I kind of went over aren't working, call us. We'll come out and try to haze the coyote. Sometimes the coyote may be sick or injured. Anytime a domestic pet has been attacked or bitten, call us because we are required by the state of California to conduct a bite investigation on that coyote. And definitely anytime, it's rare, but it does happen. Anytime a human has been attacked or bitten, call us. That's when we will actually reach out to Fish and Wildlife, and they'll get involved anytime a person has been bitten. And again, anytime there's a coyote that appears to be sick or injured. Just because a coyote is out in the daytime doesn't mean it's sick, like I was talking about earlier. We get a lot of calls for, the coyote, it's out in the daytime, there must be something wrong with it. That's not always the case, like we were discussing earlier. Things like walking in circles, foaming at the mouth, that's a big one. That's something you would want to call us for a sick coyote. These are our phone numbers. The top number, it's going to be from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's our main line. And then the bottom number at 5 p.m., the phone switch over to our nighttime line, which is the bottom phone number. Our field department is 365 days out of the year, 24 hours a day. Starting at around at 5 p.m., you will get a voice recording, but you'll have to leave a message, but all those messages are checked within minutes. There is always someone checking those messages, and there's always an officer on duty. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Fish and Wildlife, and at the end, we'll take any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, we can just switch. Pull a little. Hi, friends. Let me get this going here. My name is Mackenzie Rich. I'm a human wildlife conflict specialist at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, which is just a really fancy way to say I'm a wildlife biologist who deals with instances of human-wildlife interactions. Whether that's I've seen a coyote in my neighborhood, I'm really concerned, it's kind of been around a while, or a mountain lion ate my goat, or a bear got into my trash can. That's where I come in, and that's where Megan Senior is also a human-wildlife conflict specialist, where she comes in. So our role as a department, we are a management and steward agency. And so what that means is we manage wildlife populations, whether that be game or non-game species, but we manage them a little differently. We're mandated by the legislature by what species are kind of classified as what and what we can and can't do with those species. So for us, coyotes are classified as a non-game species. And they are a species for us that we do not actively manage their population. So that's important to note too. A lot of folks will call us and ask, hey, we'd like, this coyote's trapped and relocated. We don't want them in the park or area. We don't necessarily want them hurt, but we don't want them around anymore, right? And that is not something that we as the department are able to do. And it doesn't work for a lot of reasons that we can go into later if people have questions. So I'd love to chat about that. But that's one thing that we get commonly asked and kind of what's our role in. So we don't do that. But what we can do is if you report it to us, and I can provide anybody who wants the information later on with our website, but it's our Wildlife Incident Reporting System. And if you just Google that, CDFW, Wildlife Incident Reporting, you can get to our website. And just like that Cal tracker as well, you can put in, hey, I saw a coyote at this time, it was doing X, Y, Z, or hey, I'm really concerned, the behavior has been getting increasingly aggressive. So we are also a resource just like OC Animal Care. So if you have questions or concerns, you're welcome to reach out to us on that end. But that's kind of where we are with coyote populations. So we don't actively remove them. They are a species, though, that can be taken legally through any legal method of take at any time and any number. So it's important to note that if you are concerned about coyote populations, that is something you can advocate to your city managers or communities for. The thing to understand with coyote removal is that it is and can be a short-term solution, right? If you've got a particular animal that is acting increasingly, concerningly, and it's modifying its behavior, that is something that can be taken, but it is a short-term solution, not a long-term solution. These animals, for better or for worse, are here to stay, right? These are animals that are really urbanized at this point. They can do just as well as an urban environment in and among our communities, our neighborhoods, as they can do way out in the forest or the desert or the beach. They're an animal that is an extreme generalist, and so they're able to kind of adapt and move with that. That being said, they're also territorial animals. So let's say you take a coyote out of a neighborhood, right? You take this pack, you have a female and a male and maybe a couple of their kids, and you're like, we don't want them here, we're gonna trap and lethally remove them. Coyotes are gone, right? Not for long, because they are a territorial species. These animals will come in and fight for territories, right? So now you've removed a couple, right? It's like evicting your 40-year-old neighbor. They know what they're doing. They may cause a ruckus every now and again. There might be some loud music here and there, but overall, it's okay. Now you're replacing it with 3 15-year-olds that are all fighting for the same spot. And so they're all going to be causing a ruckus. They don't know what's going on. They don't know their boundaries. They haven't learned and been hazed and taught where to go, where's okay and where's not okay. So that is something that is likely to happen. So if you remove, coyotes, just know that you are likely to see then a potential increase later on because of that removal. So again, if it's, there's a serious concern for this animal and its behavior for people's safety or pet safety, it's definitely a solution, but be aware that, that might be something that happens. So there might be consequences to that. So definitely if you feel that it's warranted, talk to your city managers as well for that. So that's kind of a little bit about who we are and what we do as an agency. But Kevin, are you ready for questions? You have more to say? Yeah. So I will back down here into my little seat and hand that off to questions if anybody has them. Yeah.
Let me mention one thing I forgot to say when you call us about coyote incidences. Even if it's just, let's just say you saw a coyote in your neighborhood, it didn't do anything and it ran away, you can still call us and we will take a sighting call. It won't generate a field response from us necessarily, but we will take a sighting call, and that information is shared with the city if they request it. So I forgot to add that. Any questions?
Is a swimming pool considered a water source?
It can be, yes.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
And also, when I lived in Los Angeles, they did trapping of coyotes in different hills because we had so many that I think the PETA people kind of caught up in arms and they eventually stopped that. Is there some point where they get so out of control that they would maybe start a trapping program, or is that just go by the community?
It depends on the community. Some cities, I don't know specifically, but usually there's like a threshold of like if there's a specific amount of coyote activity in one area, they may reach out to a trapper. It depends.
You said there was a problem with relocation, so what was the problem?
Yeah, I'll use my fancy little button here, and we'll go from here. So ultimately, relocation is not a solution for wildlife conflict in most cases for a lot of reasons. The number one is that these animals 9 out of 10 times come back. These are extremely intelligent wild animals, and they know where they have good food, right? They know they got food, water, and shelter readily available in our neighborhoods, much easier than they would in the wild, or quote unquote wild, I guess. And so, they're going to come back ultimately. Number two, you're just like if you lethally remove one, you're potentially opening up that space. Ultimately, those attractants, just like Kevin was saying, are still there. That food, water, shelter, whether that's trash, unsecured pets, pet food that we're feeding outside, our fountains, all of those things are still available on the landscape, and there are still other coyotes around. So it's just, going to draw them in. Ultimately, the best solution for conflict is to secure those, what we call attractants. The other thing, too, is disease can be spread. So we don't, want to spread disease to other animals, especially in our more urban populations. We see mange a lot, or sarcoptic mange, in our more urban wildlife populations. Bobcats and coyotes both will, contract that. So that's when you see those real scraggly coyotes, a lot of that hair loss. We don't want to pop that into wild populations because not only can it affect wild coyotes, but it can affect wild mountain lions, bobcats, bears. We don't want to transmit diseases. And there are other diseases too. Canine distemper can be contracted and potentially transmitted. So again, there's a lot of disease that we don't want to spread. So those are kind of the primary reasons why we don't relocate animals, because ultimately it doesn't work. Thank you.
What if we hear that residents are feeding them and they provide a quite a large habitat for them?
So something like that would be, you could call us and we would probably get on board with Fish and Wildlife and go out with a warden to talk to that person. Our agency would probably go out first to confirm whether or not this is happening. And if it is happening, hopefully it's not, but if it is, we would be in contact with a warden.
Would they be who requires them to clean up their property?
So that would usually fall under, if it's like something going on with the property, like mess or something, usually code enforcement would get involved with something like that.
So you talked about rodent control. We have a bunny problem. And so do you have any tips for bunny control? And does relocating bunnies actually work, or I don't know.
So usually for like rodents and bunnies and stuff like that, they're going after a food source too. It's typically the fallen fruit that we were talking about. That's usually what they're going after. And then the rodents, usually it's the pet food. There are people in communities that, and I get where they're coming from. They have a good heart, they mean well, but when they leave food out for like stray cats, feral cats, I get where they're coming from. They have a good heart, but they have to also keep in mind they're also providing a food source for coyotes. So.
We get to call you on a bunny sighting?
We probably wouldn't do anything for a bunny sighting. Any question?
So I lived in the same area for 30 years, a little bit over. What I've noticed is coyotes are getting more aggressive. Mm-hmm. Population is increasing rapidly and way too fast. The population of people around here has been the same. I don't see new land being developed or increasingly food source for them or anything. All I see is more coyotes and more coyotes. They used to come out at night. They start coming out at dawn. They start coming out in the evening. Now, I've seen them each and every hour of the day. Mm. You mentioned about hazing. It does not work. I did it. I'm a big man. I can scream loud, and I have my air horn. Just looks at me, jumps over the fence, sits on the fence, and watch me until I chased him with a broomstick. However, I don't see, I appreciate you all coming here. I see the education, what we need to do, but I don't see a solution. I wish to go back to, okay, I want to share with the coyotes. Let them come out at night. Let me and my pets feel we're safe during the day. That's okay with me. But them hunting pets in the morning, in the evening, at noon, in the afternoon, and not afraid of people, that's not acceptable to me. I need a solution. I don't want to go hunting them on my own, but there's got to be a solution. Maybe population control, because mentioned you can't really get rid of them. Okay, let's not get rid of them. Let's do some control. Put them back where they belong a little bit. Let them come out and hunt at night. There will be enough rodents for the small population to eat. The more population they have, they are running out of natural resources, pushing them to go after pets. If we can control their population, then they have enough rodents not to actually look at our pets as a food source. That's what I need. I need to hear some kind of solution in that regards, please, if there is any.
Okay. Did you have any comment?
So what I can say, and what kind of just coming to mind off what you said, the last thing you were talking about as far as, there's not enough rodents for them and therefore they're going for our pets, there isn't really any data to support that theory. These animals are predators, and if there is something small, we recognize our small pets, our cats, our dogs as pets, and we love them and they're part of the family. But these are wild animals that don't recognize that, and to them it's just a small mammal that's running around, and that is what their primary prey is. That is what, to them, they see that as a food source. So it's not necessarily because there isn't enough wild food for them. It's because in their brains there is no distinction between the two. That is still a wild, that is a small mammal. It's a small fluffy thing running around, and that means food. So there's that. The other thing, too, is sometimes our animals aren't necessarily seen as prey. It can also be seen as a competitor, especially this time of year. So March, April is when coyotes typically give birth. The pups cannot leave the den for 3 to 4 weeks. They are den bound because they are too delicate and small to move. And so mom, dad, and usually a couple older siblings as well are focused around the den, and we typically see an increase in what people describe as aggressive behavior. The coyote's following me. The coyote, I was on the leash walking my dog, and the coyote was coming after and nipping at the dog. Typically, that kind of behavior, especially at this time of year, even now when it's considered pup rearing season, is a defensive behavior. So they are seeing that is something that looks kind of like me, but it's an animal and it might be a threat, and I want to make sure that my pups are safe. And so that can also be, a cause of attacks, quote unquote, on pets. Is it, sometimes for sure can be, it's a small fluffy thing it's running away from me, or, what have you, that means food. It's running at me barking. That's a threat to me. I want to defend myself or my pups. So that can be that. So I wouldn't necessarily say, you're right, populations have been relatively steady in the area, people seeing more coyote activity. Just as coyotes become, what Kevin is talking about, habituated and used to people and people activity, we're seeing them, relatively at any time of day. Just like you said, coyotes can be active morning, noon, and night, and it really doesn't matter. But for them to be active, they're not worried about mountain lions, which are a predator for them out in more of the wildland areas. They are worried about cars and, people, but not so much, as they learn that they can be active in people areas if they're not being hazed regularly by a community, just like Kevin was talking about. They can learn that behavior is, okay, I can be out active at this time of day. And, oh, look, hey, there's a pet that's left out alone. It's a really unfortunate thing, and I can't imagine losing a pet like that. Obviously, I'm a wildlife person. I love my pets. They're my family. I can't imagine, seriously, losing a pet like that. But that being said, it's a risk that is taken every time you get into a car, right? You can put your seatbelt on. You can make sure you're strapped in. Your car's tires are new. You've got gas. Things can still happen if you're not taking, even if you're taking proper precautions. But taking those precautions, wearing your seatbelt, having your pet on a short 6-foot leash if it's small and outside and you're walking, or making sure you're in the yard with them. There are things that we can do as a community to try to help prevent that from happening. And I genuinely, I can't imagine, and I so sympathize with that. But that's one of the things too. So ultimately, I think, like we talked about, population control for coyotes really isn't a viable solution, as much as I wish it was. I wish there was a solid answer that could get everybody on the same page and make everybody happy and help the wildlife populations and keep them stable and also everything else. But ultimately, that's just inviting other coyotes in. So, but like you were saying, if there is, a population or a small group that are increasingly habituated, they're becoming food conditioned, which is kind of a step up above habituated. So food conditioned is not only have these animals learned that people aren't really a threat, but they have learned to associate humans with food, whether that is direct feeding by leaving steaks out, leaving some kind of pet food out, and seeing food in urban areas and associating that with people. That can be a potential time when you might want to consider, removing those animals from the population and almost starting over, quote unquote, right? And making sure that as a community, we're taking those steps to try to prevent that habituation and food conditioning from happening in the first place.
But if you see weird things, call these folks here to help.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. 100%. You guys in Orange County
One
have
standing on a
amazing-
fence looking at you and you can't get it to go away, call OC Animal Control.
Oh my gosh, 100%. You guys have an amazing resource here. Seriously, Kevin is fantastic. The organization is fantastic. So utilize those resources that are available.
So another solution, if I can add on, is there is I think Fish and Wildlife calls it Wildlife Watch. That's a really good resource, and what that is, it's like a community group that goes door to door, kind of telling people about what we're talking about tonight, about hazing, about pet ownership, about cleaning up your property. It's usually a group, I think it's like between 5 and 10 people, and they'll go out and talk to neighbors to get everyone on board, because I know in an age of Amazon Prime and instant downloads, like people want a solution like 10 minutes ago. This takes a little bit of work, but overall, in the long run, communities that put together this kind of community team to go door to door and talk about coyotes, we see a much better success rate because it lets the community get involved. They create next door groups on the Nextdoor app. It takes a little bit of work, but overall, it's found that program works very well. It works better than, if we trap coyotes, you may see a decrease instantly, but like they were saying, overall, it could create a vacuum, and it creates competition, and it creates the new pack from overpopulating, and it explodes. So, like I said, typically the community involvement, wildlife watch aspect has much better results. So,
What makes any animal go the distance for food? Jump one fence, two fence, three fences looking for food. If we don't have data, as the lady said here, yes, I don't have data either. But the fact says an animal to go out of his territory, jump 3 or 4 different fences looking for a source of food to eat, it simply means they ran out of their natural resources in their own habitat. That's what's driving them towards the homes. I don't need a study to tell me that.
they do like kind of that thrill of the hunt, though, too. So that is part of it. They are a predator.
There's too many of them or too little food source for them, or both. That's why they're going to our homes.
Or,
Really more of a comment, probably about wife and I came to a meeting regarding coyotes for Bill Clark. And there was a professor from UC Riverside who had a system he had developed. And we were given, my wife and I were given the key to one of the trails where it's blocked because of the water district here. And the idea was this. The professor had come up with an idea that he would take carcasses of dead cats, dead dogs. They were somehow saturated with the saline solution, and they were placed along all the different waterways here, Villa Park over here, where water comes down through Snapjabber Creek.
Do you do anything with birth control? I know in some places they feed them birth control with.
yeah, that would be something, I don't know if you could, that would not be us.
That is not something the department is currently working towards or looking at. There are a lot of sideline issues associated with that. You know, you can't just target coyotes, you're going to target other animals. There's no way to control the dose, how much they get. So ultimately, you know, it seems like a quick and easy solution, and honest to gracious, I wish it was, but ultimately it's not as quick and easy as it seems.
I was just going to mention, one morning we woke up and we had 5 in our backyard. Not just one, but 5.
A pack.
You know when you're seeing 5 that they're pretty rampant in
Yeah.
an area, right?
Yeah, that's probably you had the pack in your backyard. That's typically,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, they were all just hanging out in the morning. It's
Yeah.
like-
So that's what we call like a rendezvous behavior. They'll have a rendezvous site. So especially as pups get older, they'll start kind of, like your teenagers, right? They go off on their own, they have explore, but they all kind of meet back in one spot. So sometimes that's in our yards. We definitely see populations swell about this time of year. You're 100% correct, especially as our pups are getting bigger now and they're in their awkward teenage years. Typically, they'll leave mom and dad around November, so we'll definitely see a decrease in population size around then. Sometimes a couple pups will stay with mom for another year or so, and they'll help raise the next litter. But typically, we'll see that decrease in concentrated populations around that time of year. So when out of curiosity, when did you see these guys? Spring, yeah, ish. Yeah, around this time of year, give or take. Okay, cool.
I thought when they did trapping, they euthanized them. I didn't think that, like when they did it in LA, I thought they were euthanized, not just relocating the coyotes.
Yep.
So you euthanize them and then you're decreasing the population instead of moving them so they can come back again, right?
Turn myself back on. Yeah, so that's exactly what happens. When coyotes are trapped, they have to either be euthanized humanely at the trap right then and there or released from the trap right then and there. So those are kind of like the two options as far as like the public response goes from that. So they are, decreasing the population in that way. But again, it's like a temporary decrease most oftentimes. Yeah.
Typically, the ones we are able to trap are sick or injured coyotes. A healthy coyote, it's almost impossible to trap because they're so smart. I've actually watched one from my truck. There's a trip plate on the traps. They'll step over it to get to the food. They're very smart. Typically, we will not catch a healthy coyote in a trap. It's usually sick, injured, has really bad mange. That's typically. That would be awesome.
Yeah, to answer your question, they're usually either foothold traps, so like Kevin was saying, they'll step on it, it'll close around the leg, and they can't go anywhere, or there are box traps that can be used too. So it's either one. But leg hold traps, if that's something you guys were considering, the department has there's code and regulations on what kind of foothold traps can and can't be used. Usually, we recommend folks hire a trapper in that case, or talk to.
Our agency uses box traps with a trip plate. So.
The gentleman here mentioned, which I agree, I've seen it firsthand. Coyotes can clear a 6-foot fence with one leap without even running. They could be in front of the fence, one leap, they're over. An 8-foot fence, very easily climbed, and he mentioned the rollers. I've seen them in action on videos, they work. But you gotta have a tall fence where if a coyote is actually climbing the fence, at the last step, he gets to a roller, he rolls back. To the best of my knowledge, which, correct me please, the city ordinance does not allow more than 6-foot fences. Are we doing anything about it in this regards? So each and every person have to apply for a permit. And we can't just in general say, hey, people, protect yourselves. You're allowed 8-foot fences, put your rollers, since we really have no viable solution. I heard a lot of good information here, but I did not hear a solution. It has to be a tall fence. Oh, yeah, all I'm asking is, like, each and individual homeowner has to go to the city and say, I want to raise my fences, and get a special permit to do it. That's the solution. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I mean, it's, we get calls all the time here in City Hall about coyotes and people walking around and see them, and they're in their yards and all that. So the more informed people are, the better off they'll
Correct.
be. And I learned several new things. I have a compost pile, you know, because of the new regulations that we have about food waste. So I have a compost pile. Well, I didn't realize the coyotes fed off of the compost pile, so I'm going to have to make other arrangements. So I learned something new tonight, and thank you for that.
Yeah, well, thank you all for coming. Feel free, if you have any concerns or any questions about coyotes, you can always call the numbers up there. And after the meeting, I'll stick around if you guys have any questions. Thank you.